You've heard the stories. Golden treasures glinting beneath desert sands, pharaohs wrapped in linen and legend, pyramids reaching toward eternity like stone prayers frozen against the sky. But what if everything you think you know about ancient Egypt is simply the surface layer of something far more profound? What if beneath those familiar tales lies a civilization that deliberately buried its most dangerous secrets, layer by layer, century after century, until the truth became legend and legend became myth? In 2024, that possibility became reality. Deep beneath Saqqara's shifting sands, where the desert wind carries whispers of forgotten kings, a Swiss-French archaeological team broke through into a sealed chamber that had remained untouched for more than 4,000 years. The limestone blocks that sealed the entrance bore no royal cartouche, no divine proclamation, no hint of the extraordinary discovery waiting in the darkness beyond. They expected a mummy, perhaps some burial goods, maybe another piece of Egypt's well-documented puzzle. Instead, they stepped into a mystery that would challenge everything we understand about the ancient world. The chamber revealed walls covered in paintings so vivid they seemed to pulse with life in the archaeologists' LED beams. Colors that should have faded millennia ago blazed with impossible freshness, deep blues like midnight sky, golds that caught light like captured sunfire, reds the color of fresh blood. But as the team's excitement grew, a troubling realization emerged from the shadows. The tomb belonged to Teti Neb Fu, royal physician to the dying Old Kingdom, a man whose very existence had been nearly erased from the historical record. His titles, carved in elegant hieroglyphs across the entrance threshold, told of extraordinary authority. But this wasn't just another court doctor dispensing herbs and incantations. His walls carried 3 designations so rare that Egyptologists struggled to find parallels anywhere in 4 millennia of recorded Egyptian civilization. He was a conjurer of Serket, the scorpion goddess whose domain encompassed both healing and venom, life and death intertwined like lovers in an eternal dance. He was director of medicinal plants, a position recorded in fewer than a handful of inscriptions across all Egyptian history, suggesting knowledge so specialized it was granted to almost no one. And he was chief dentist, an authority almost never concentrated in a single individual, requiring understanding of anatomy, metallurgy, and surgical precision that wouldn't be seen again for thousands of years. One man holding such concentrated medical power should have been buried with the reverence reserved for pharaohs themselves. Instead, they found something that chilled the expedition to their bones, an empty tomb. Beautiful paintings covered every surface like a medical encyclopedia, written in pigment and gold. Formulaic recipes decorated the walls in precise hieroglyphic text. Surgical procedures were depicted in vivid detail that would make modern medical illustrators pause in admiration. But no body, no mummy, no trace that Teti Neb Fu had ever been laid to rest in his own burial chamber. The emptiness felt deliberate, almost accusatory, as if the chamber itself was posing questions no one wanted to answer. Colonel Gibson, a retired Army Corps of Engineers officer who spent 3 decades building military installations across hostile terrain from Afghanistan to the Horn of Africa, examined the architectural surveys transmitted from Saqqara with the methodical precision that had kept American soldiers alive in impossible places. His assessment arrived via encrypted email at 0347 hours, as direct and unsettling as morning reveille. In 30 years of construction in impossible places, mountain bases in Hindu Kush, forward operating positions in Iraqi desert, supply depots in African wilderness, I've never seen precision like this. These aren't decorative walls built by artists with bronze chisels. They're engineered structures created by people who understood load distribution, stress analysis, and architectural permanence at a level that rivals modern construction standards. And someone with equivalent expertise deliberately removed everything that mattered. The implications settled over the archaeological community like desert dust after a sandstorm, coating everything with unease. But the mystery deepened when French conservators, working under high-intensity LED arrays that revealed details invisible to earlier generations of archaeologists, noticed something that transformed curiosity into genuine alarm. Throughout Teti Neb Fu's tomb, entire sections of inscriptions had been deliberately chiseled out with surgical precision, not damaged by time, weather, or the casual vandalism that mars so many ancient sites. Removed. Clean cuts showed tool marks consistent with metal implements, far harder than bronze. Precise edges revealed planning and patience. Surgical erasure of specific knowledge, applied with the same methodical care that had created the paintings themselves. Medical formulas were gone, carved away as if they had never existed. Botanical diagrams had been scraped from the limestone with tools that left microscopic scratches in patterns that modern analysis reveals could only have been made by implements approaching the hardness of modern steel. References to venom rituals and protective ceremonies had been methodically deleted from the historical record with a thoroughness that spoke of institutional authority, not individual vandalism. This wasn't random destruction. It was controlled censorship, applied by people who understood exactly what knowledge they were eliminating and why that elimination was necessary for their civilization's survival. You see, when Jean-François Champollion finally cracked the hieroglyphic code in 1822, after 20 years of methodical linguistic archaeology that would have broken lesser minds, the first thing scholars noticed wasn't what the ancient inscriptions revealed about Egyptian civilization. It was what had been carved away from the stone surfaces with deliberate, systematic precision. The silence spoke louder than any proclamation of divine authority or royal achievement. The discovery began with the Rosetta Stone itself, that famous trilingual decree that seemed so straightforward until scholars realized the hieroglyphic text wasn't identical to the Greek version. The Egyptian script contained additions, phrases that elevated ordinary administrative statements into divine proclamations, lines that existed only in the sacred language, as if Egypt was maintaining two versions of reality, one for foreign consumption and another for those who could read the symbols of the gods. If the official inscriptions had been modified, Champollion reasoned with the logical precision that would later characterize French archaeological methodology, then what else had been deliberately altered? That question drove him beyond mere translation into a deeper investigation of systematic textual manipulation that would occupy scholars for the next 2 centuries. Across Egypt, from the limestone quarries of Saqqara to the sandstone temples of Thebes, from the granite monuments of Luxor to the ancient necropolis at Giza, the same chilling pattern emerged like a disease spreading through the archaeological record. Entire lines and tombs had been deliberately chiseled out with tool precision that left distinctive marks in the stone. Words, sentences, sometimes full passages removed with mathematical accuracy that spoke of institutional authority, not individual vandalism or religious zealotry. This wasn't the casual destruction of conquering armies or the opportunistic vandalism of tomb robbers seeking quick profit. It wasn't erosion, weathering, or the slow decay that claims all human monuments to time's relentless advance. It was censorship, applied with the same systematic thoroughness that characterized Egyptian administrative efficiency in taxation, irrigation, and military organization. The missing material followed patterns that became impossible to ignore Once scholars began mapping the erasures across geographic and temporal boundaries. Wherever text had been scraped away, the subject matter fell into predictable categories that suggested coordinated suppression rather than random loss. Rituals involving healing disappeared from tomb walls. References to venom preparation and antidote formulation vanished from medical papyri. Descriptions of protective ceremonies associated with dangerous deities were carved away with surgical precision. The exact categories associated with Teti Nebu Fu, the royal physician whose body had vanished from his own elaborately prepared tomb. Dr. Hawthorne from NASA's Materials Engineering Division, whose career analyzing spacecraft hull integrity had trained him to recognize tool marks invisible to untrained eyes, examined high-resolution photographs of erasure sites across Egypt with the same methodical attention he applied to heat shield damage assessment. His analysis, delivered in technical language stripped of emotional interpretation, carried implications that chilled archaeological conferences for months. These removal patterns display consistency across centuries and geographical regions that indicates centralized planning and standardized implementation. The tool marks show characteristics that don't match bronze implements or stone chisels. The cutting angles are too precise, the depth penetration too uniform, the edge characteristics too clean for the officially recognized technology of Bronze Age civilization. We're looking at systematic knowledge removal executed with tools that shouldn't exist in the historical timeline we've constructed for ancient Egypt. The implications reached far beyond individual tombs or isolated incidents of textual modification. One of the clearest examples of this systematic approach emerged from the temple complex at Abydos, where a priest's tomb originally contained detailed medical texts that had been almost completely obliterated by systematic scraping. What little remained of the original inscriptions carried warnings that sent chills through translation teams. These words shall not be spoken aloud. Strike out the path that leads to harm. Seal what protects the soul from what dwells beneath. These phrases appeared in tombs, scattered from Saqqara to Thebes, from Luxor to Giza, always linked to knowledge involving poisons and remedies. Protection rituals associated with dangerous deities like Serket and Sekhmet, goddesses whose domains encompassed both healing and destruction. Life and death intertwined in ways that ancient Egyptians clearly considered too dangerous for general knowledge. Engineer Morrison, whose 15 years as a defense contractor working on classified materials research had taught him to recognize patterns of information control and security protocols, studied the distribution maps of erasure sites with growing unease. His experience managing sensitive technological information for military applications provided a framework for understanding what he was seeing in ancient Egypt. This isn't random knowledge loss, Morrison explained during a secure video conference that connected his suburban Virginia office with archaeological teams across 3 continents. This is systematic information management executed across centuries with consistency that indicates institutional memory and standardized protocols. Egypt had procedures for controlling dangerous knowledge, and they implemented those protocols repeatedly whenever political stability was threatened or religious authority was challenged. Someone at multiple points in Egyptian history didn't want specific categories of medical, chemical, and ritual knowledge to survive into the future. The most extraordinary manifestation of this institutional knowledge control lies buried beneath the desert at Saqqara, in a vast underground necropolis that houses what may be the most precisely engineered artifacts ever created by human hands. The Serapeum, a labyrinthine complex of tunnels and chambers carved deep into the limestone bedrock, contains 24 granite sarcophagi that challenge every assumption about ancient Egyptian technological capabilities. Each sarcophagus weighs between 70 and 100 tons. Each was carved from a single piece of granite, or diorite. Stones harder than iron, quarried from sites hundreds of miles away, and somehow transported through narrow tunnels barely wider than the boxes themselves. The precision of their construction exceeds anything achieved by contemporary civilizations and rivals the tolerances maintained by modern industrial manufacturing. Engineer Morrison, whose security clearance had given him access to classified manufacturing processes used in advanced weapons systems, examined detailed measurements and photographic surveys of the Serapeum boxes with growing incredulity. His analysis, delivered in the precise technical language that characterizes military engineering reports, stripped away any possibility of dismissing these artifacts as products of primitive Bronze Age craftsmanship. The internal dimensions vary by less than 2 millimeters across surfaces spanning several meters in length. The walls are polished to near mirror smoothness, using techniques that produce surface irregularities smaller than those achieved by contemporary machine shop equipment. The internal angles form perfect 90-degree corners with precision that requires measurement tools and cutting implements we associate with computer-controlled manufacturing systems. The lids fit so tightly they create almost airtight seals that would challenge modern gasket technology. To achieve such precision today, Morrison explained in technical briefings that left Pentagon procurement specialists questioning their assumptions about technological development, requires diamond-tipped cutting tools, laser alignment systems, computer-controlled milling machines, and measurement instruments calibrated to tolerances measured in fractions of millimeters. Yet somehow, according to conventional archaeological theory, ancient Egyptian craftsmen created these masterpieces using copper chisels, stone hammers, and wooden measuring rods. The logistics of construction and installation present even greater challenges to conventional explanations. The tunnels containing these massive boxes are barely wider than the sarcophagi themselves, carved deep beneath the desert through solid limestone with narrow turns and sloping passages that would challenge modern heavy lifting equipment. If teams of workers had moved these 100-ton objects using ropes and manual labor, as traditional theories propose, they would have required maneuvering space, mechanical advantage systems, and structural support platforms that simply don't exist in the archaeological record. No ramps have been discovered, no scaffolding marks appear on tunnel walls, no lifting platforms or pulley anchors show evidence of the massive forces that would be necessary to position objects weighing more than military battle tanks in underground chambers accessible only through passages designed for human movement. Dr. Hayes, a geologist whose 25 years mapping oil deposits beneath the Texas prairie had taught him to read subsurface structures like three-dimensional puzzles, used ground-penetrating radar and seismic analysis to map the Serapeum's construction sequence. His findings challenged every assumption about ancient Egyptian building techniques and timeline management. The entire complex shows evidence of multiple construction phases spanning centuries, with each expansion extending the tunnel system deeper into bedrock, and each new section displaying increasingly sophisticated engineering solutions. The granite boxes weren't installed during initial construction. They were somehow positioned after the chambers were complete, which makes the logistics even more impossible to explain using conventional ancient technology. Inside the chambers themselves, archaeologists discovered traces of the technique used to position the sarcophagi once they had somehow been transported into the underground complex. The rooms had been filled with sand, allowing the granite boxes to be slid across the loose surface, then lowered into their final positions as the sand was gradually removed through carefully planned drainage systems. This ingenious method explains the final positioning, but it does nothing to address how 100-ton objects were transported through narrow tunnels in the first place. chemical analysis of residues found inside the sarcophagi adds another layer of mystery that contradicts their supposed function as burial containers for sacred bulls. Traditional Egyptian animal mummification used specific resins, salts, and preservation materials that leave distinctive chemical signatures. Instead, laboratory analysis revealed unusual organic compounds, unidentified fermentation byproducts, and chemical residues that suggest processes involving gas expansion, thermal reactions, and pressure buildup over extended periods. The granite itself contains high concentrations of quartz crystal, a mineral that generates electrical charge when subjected to mechanical stress, temperature variations, or vibrational forces. Inside sealed chambers where gases might accumulate and temperatures could fluctuate seasonally, these boxes could theoretically produce electromagnetic effects, acoustic resonance, or other phenomena that ancient Egyptians might have considered supernatural or divine. Dr. Ashford, whose 2 decades studying preservation techniques at the Smithsonian had ended abruptly when he began questioning institutional orthodoxy about ancient capabilities, examined the chemical evidence with the methodical skepticism that had characterized his academic career before it became politically inconvenient. These weren't simple burial containers for sacred animals, Ashford concluded in research papers that cost him his institutional affiliation, but gained him credibility among independent researchers worldwide. The chemical signatures, the engineering precision, the impossible logistics, everything points to a technological application we don't understand, implemented by people whose capabilities we've systematically underestimated for more than 2 centuries. The pattern of systematic knowledge control and technological suppression extends beyond erased inscriptions and impossible engineering into the realm of royal burials themselves, where the most sacred traditions of Egyptian civilization show signs of hasty improvisation and deliberate deception. When Howard Carter uncovered Tutankhamun's tomb in 1922, he expected the burial of a pharaoh to follow the elaborate protocols that had governed royal interments for millennia. Instead, he stepped into something that has puzzled archaeologists for more than a century: a royal tomb that behaves nothing like a royal tomb should. From the moment Carter's candle flame revealed the antechamber's golden gleam, everything about the burial felt wrong to experienced eyes. The chambers were cramped and asymmetrical, completely unlike the monumental spaces prepared for pharaohs years or sometimes decades before their deaths. Royal tombs were architectural statements of divine authority, featuring wide corridors, expansive halls, and careful astronomical orientations that connected the deceased king with cosmic forces. But Tutankhamun's resting place looked rushed, improvised, and oddly inappropriate for a pharaoh of Egypt. The tomb's dimensions alone raised troubling questions among specialists familiar with Egyptian mortuary architecture. It resembled burial spaces typically reserved for noble women rather than divine kings. The proportions, the layout, even the orientation followed patterns associated with queens, not pharaohs. Most significantly, the burial chamber turns right instead of left. A detail that might seem trivial to casual observers, but carried profound symbolic importance in Egyptian religious architecture, where directional choices reflected theological concepts about the journey through death toward rebirth. This single architectural detail led many researchers to argue that Tutankhamun was placed in a tomb originally constructed for someone else, most likely Queen Nefertiti, whose own burial location remains one of archaeology's greatest mysteries. If this theory proves accurate, then the implications multiply exponentially. Why was the boy king interred in a burial space clearly intended for a woman? Where was the magnificent tomb that should have been prepared for a pharaoh of his lineage? What circumstances forced Egypt to abandon normal royal burial protocols so completely? Dr. Patricia from Johns Hopkins, whose surgical experience reconstructing facial trauma had taught her to read the subtle signs of anatomical modification, examined high-resolution photographs of Tutankhamun's famous golden mask with the analytical precision she applied to medical cases involving complex reconstruction. Her findings challenged one of archaeology's most cherished assumptions about ancient Egyptian craftsmanship and royal burial practices. "This mask wasn't created for Tutankhamun," Dr. Patricia announced during a medical conference that included archaeological specialists studying ancient surgical techniques. "The facial proportions are wrong for the mummy's actual skull structure. The jawline doesn't match. The cheek contours follow different anatomical landmarks. Most significantly, the mask has pierced ears, which were typically associated with queens or young children, never adult male pharaohs." Modern forensic reconstruction of Tutankhamun's actual facial features, based on CT scans of his mummy, revealed striking discrepancies with the mask that has become synonymous with ancient Egyptian civilization. The golden face that graces museum exhibitions worldwide was crafted to represent someone else entirely, someone whose delicate features and elongated eyes aligned far more closely with surviving depictions of Queen Nefertiti, the powerful female ruler who may have served as pharaoh in her own right during the political chaos that preceded Tutankhamun's brief reign. Material analysis provided additional evidence of the mask's true origins. The golden face consists of different types of gold alloys than the rest of the artifact, suggesting multiple construction phases or source materials. The face appears older than the surrounding elements, worked with techniques that predate Tutankhamun's era. Most revealing of all, X-ray examination of the mask's interior revealed the ghostly traces of an earlier inscription, a feminine name that had been carefully scratched out and replaced with Tutankhamun's cartouche, Stanley from the Mayo Clinic, whose research into ancient preservation techniques had uncovered evidence of sophisticated chemical knowledge in Egyptian mummification, examined the wrappings and resin residues from Tutankhamun's burial with growing amazement. His laboratory analysis revealed compounds that challenged assumptions about Bronze Age capabilities in chemistry and materials science. These preservation materials contain antifungal and antibacterial properties more effective than certain modern chemicals, Stanley reported in medical journals that bridged ancient studies with contemporary pharmaceutical research. Some compounds require complex heating processes and chemical extraction techniques that shouldn't be possible without advanced laboratory equipment. Egypt wasn't simply using natural plant resins. They were engineering synthetic preservatives through processes we're only beginning to understand. The rushed nature of Tutankhamun's burial becomes even more apparent when examining the tomb's artwork, where conservators discovered microscopic evidence that paintings were sealed while still wet. Microbes embedded in the pigment could only form when paint was covered before fully drying. Clear indication that the burial was completed with unprecedented haste that violated every protocol of royal Egyptian funerary tradition. Everything about the burial screamed emergency. It was as if Egypt had run out of time, forcing officials to assemble a pharaoh's eternal resting place from whatever high-status materials happened to be available, regardless of their original intended purpose or symbolic appropriateness. The most staggering evidence of Egypt's systematic approach to knowledge management and population control emerges from discoveries that dwarf individual royal tombs in scope and implications. In 1996, archaeologists working in the El Gamhoud burial ground uncovered what may be the largest concentration of preserved human remains in world history. A cemetery containing hundreds of thousands, possibly approaching 1 million mummified bodies that challenge every assumption about ancient Egyptian social structure and preservation capabilities. Unlike the elaborate royal necropolises that capture public imagination, El Gamhud contained ordinary people. Farmers, craftsmen, laborers, children, individuals who should never have had access to mummification procedures that were supposedly reserved for elite classes, wealthy enough to afford expensive preservation processes. Yet here they lay, wrapped in simple linen, placed in shallow graves, and preserved through methods that defy conventional understanding of Egyptian mortuary practices. Dr. Hayes, whose geological surveys had mapped oil deposits across thousands of square miles of Texas prairie, applied seismic analysis and ground-penetrating radar to determine the cemetery's true extent. His findings revealed a burial complex that dwarfs anything previously discovered in the ancient world, with implications that reach far beyond archaeology into questions of social organization, resource management, and population dynamics that Egypt never documented in surviving records. We're looking at industrial-scale human preservation, Hayes reported during a geological survey conference that attracted archaeologists from 3 continents. The burial density indicates systematic processing of human remains across multiple centuries, with organizational efficiency that rivals modern cemetery management systems. This wasn't random burial of plague victims or war casualties. This was planned, methodical, large-scale preservation executed with administrative precision. The preservation methods revealed through CT scanning and chemical analysis show striking variations that suggest experimentation rather than standardized procedures. Many bodies were preserved through natural desert dehydration, positioned in sand-lined graves that created perfect conditions for tissue preservation without expensive embalming materials. Others displayed crude mummification attempts with inconsistent resin application, partial organ removal, and incision sites that don't match formal Egyptian techniques documented in royal burials. Some individuals showed evidence of simple drying without any ritual preparation whatsoever, while others had been treated with preservation chemicals that required sophisticated processing techniques. The variations weren't random. They followed patterns that suggested systematic testing of different preservation methods, as if Egyptian specialists were conducting large-scale experiments in human conservation using populations that left no written records of their own experiences. Dr. Clare from Harvard, whose medical history research had uncovered evidence of advanced surgical techniques in multiple ancient civilizations, examined tissue samples and wrapping materials from El Gamhud with growing amazement at the sophisticated chemical knowledge they revealed. Her laboratory analysis indicated preservation processes that challenged assumptions about Bronze Age capabilities in chemistry and materials science. These aren't simple natural preservation effects, Clare explained during medical conferences that bridged ancient studies with contemporary pathology research. Many bodies show evidence of chemical treatment using compounds that require complex extraction processes and precise mixing ratios. Some preservation materials display antifungal properties that exceed certain modern chemicals in effectiveness. We're looking at systematic chemical knowledge applied on an industrial scale to populations that supposedly had no access to such advanced techniques. The timing of the cemetery's use correlates precisely with periods of political instability and environmental stress that marked the decline of various Egyptian dynasties. Radiocarbon dating indicates peak usage during the collapse of the Old Kingdom, the upheaval surrounding Akhenaten's religious revolution, and the turbulent end of the New Kingdom. Exactly the same historical windows when medical knowledge was being erased from tomb walls and royal burial protocols were being disrupted by emergency circumstances. Most troubling, there are almost no written records describing El Gamhud's existence, no administrative texts referencing its operation, no burial manuals explaining its procedures, no Hariri inscriptions identifying its purpose. For the largest burial project in Egyptian history, involving resource allocation and organizational capabilities that should have generated extensive documentation, the silence in official records is overwhelming and deliberate. The absence of documentation follows the same pattern of systematic knowledge suppression that characterizes other aspects of Egyptian secret-keeping. Just as medical texts were scraped from tomb walls and engineering capabilities were hidden from general knowledge, the existence of mass preservation capabilities was apparently considered too sensitive for official record-keeping. Hayes's geological analysis revealed additional mysteries that compound the site's enigmatic nature. The cemetery's layout follows geometric patterns that suggest astronomical alignment, with burial clusters oriented toward specific celestial events that would have required sophisticated observational knowledge. Underground water channels directed moisture away from preservation areas with engineering precision that indicates advanced understanding of hydrology and soil mechanics. This isn't just a large cemetery, Hayes concluded in geological surveys that mapped the site's full extent. It's an engineered landscape designed for optimal preservation conditions using environmental control methods that demonstrate scientific understanding of decomposition processes, moisture management, and chemical preservation that we associate with modern funeral industry techniques. The bodies themselves tell stories of lives that official Egyptian records never acknowledged. Evidence of occupational stress patterns, dietary deficiencies, and disease profiles that paint pictures of working populations whose existence was systematically excluded from the monumental inscriptions that celebrate royal achievements and divine authority. The most compelling evidence that ancient Egypt possessed medical knowledge far beyond official historical records comes not from tomb inscriptions or papyrus texts, but from the bodies of the dead themselves. Modern CT scanning technology has transformed mummy research from external observation into detailed internal examination, revealing surgical procedures and anatomical modifications that challenge every assumption about Bronze Age medical capabilities. Dr. Patricia, whose surgical experience at Johns Hopkins had included complex reconstructive procedures requiring intimate knowledge of human anatomy, examined high-resolution scans of Egyptian mummies with growing amazement at the sophistication they revealed. Her medical training provided a framework for recognizing surgical intervention that archaeologists might interpret as natural preservation effects or post-mortem damage. These aren't simple mummification procedures, Patricia explained during medical conferences that attracted both archaeologists and contemporary surgeons. We're looking at deliberate anatomical reconstruction performed by people who understood bone structure, muscle attachment points, and circulatory systems at levels comparable to modern medical education. Someone rebuilt these bodies from the inside out using techniques that wouldn't be redeveloped until the Renaissance. The most striking example involves a mummy known as Lady Shanetta, whose CT scans revealed systematic internal reconstruction that went far beyond traditional preservation methods. Artificial eyes had been carefully positioned in her sockets, using materials that required sophisticated chemical processing. Her throat had been packed with precisely measured amounts of linen to prevent structural collapse during preservation. Most remarkably, her spine had been reinforced, and her facial features reshaped beneath the wrappings using techniques that demonstrated advanced understanding of anatomical engineering. Other mummies revealed even more startling evidence of surgical intervention that simply shouldn't exist in ancient civilization. One skull showed cut marks around a brain tumor in patterns suggesting that ancient physicians had attempted to examine or treat the growth using procedures that required opening the cranium, a surgical technique not officially developed until medieval times. Bone fractures had been set with precision that rivals contemporary orthopedic methods, with damaged limbs realigned and stabilized using resin-based splints, that provided mechanical support comparable to modern casting materials. Dental interventions discovered in mummy CT scans challenged assumptions about ancient Egyptian medical capabilities even further. Metal wires anchored loose teeth using techniques similar to modern orthodontic procedures. Gold fixtures reinforced damaged molars with precision that required detailed understanding of dental anatomy and metallurgical processing. Some individuals showed evidence of tooth extraction and replacement using materials that had been shaped to match original dental profiles with accuracy that speaks to sophisticated measurement and fabrication capabilities. Dr. Whitmore from the CDC, whose toxicological research had focused on identifying chemical residues in forensic investigations, analyzed preservation materials found in Egyptian mummies with particular attention to compounds that might indicate advanced pharmaceutical knowledge. His findings revealed chemical signatures that challenged conventional understanding of Bronze Age capabilities in medicine and chemistry. These preservation formulas contain synthesized compounds that require complex extraction and refinement processes, Whitmore reported in toxicological journals that bridged ancient studies with contemporary pharmaceutical research. Some materials show evidence of deliberate chemical modification to enhance specific properties: antifungal effectiveness, tissue penetration, long-term stability. We're looking at pharmaceutical engineering that demonstrates scientific methodology and chemical knowledge that officially wouldn't exist for another 3,000 years. The chemical analysis extended beyond preservation materials to evidence of medical intervention during the subjects' lifetimes. Several mummies showed tissue residues consistent with surgical anesthesia using plant-based compounds that had been concentrated and refined through processes requiring sophisticated botanical knowledge and chemical extraction techniques. Others displayed evidence of antibiotic treatments using substances that modern pharmaceutical research has only recently identified as having antimicrobial properties. Most disturbing, some individuals showed signs of chronic exposure to chemical compounds that suggest experimental medical treatment or systematic poisoning using toxins that required advanced understanding of human physiology and biochemical processes. The patterns weren't random. They followed protocols that indicated systematic testing of medical procedures and pharmaceutical interventions using human subjects whose experiences were never documented in surviving Egyptian medical texts. Stanley, from the Mayo Clinic, whose research into ancient healing practices had uncovered evidence of sophisticated medical knowledge in multiple civilizations, examined the temporal distribution of advanced surgical evidence with growing concern about the implications for understanding ancient Egyptian social organization and knowledge management. The surgical sophistication appears in clusters that correlate with political upheaval and religious instability. Stanley observed during medical conferences that included historians specializing in ancient Egyptian politics. Advanced medical procedures show up during the same historical windows when traditional burial protocols were disrupted and medical texts were being erased from tomb walls. It's as if medical knowledge that was normally restricted to elite specialists was being applied more widely during crisis periods. The evidence points towards a medical establishment that operated in parallel to the public healing practices documented in surviving papyrus texts and temple inscriptions. This shadow medical system possessed surgical capabilities, pharmaceutical knowledge, and anatomical understanding that exceeded anything officially recorded in Egyptian medical literature. The same pattern of systematic knowledge restriction that characterized engineering capabilities and ritual practices extended into medicine, with advanced techniques apparently reserved for circumstances that required intervention beyond conventional healing methods. Egypt's hidden technological capabilities extend far beyond medical knowledge and preservation techniques into the realm of precision engineering and mechanical devices that challenge every assumption about Bronze Age technological limitations. Scattered throughout Egyptian ruins are artifacts that behave less like religious symbols and more like sophisticated instruments, revealing a parallel technological tradition that operated alongside the monumental architecture that captures public attention. The most extraordinary example was discovered in 1954 when archaeologists excavating near the Great Pyramid uncovered a sealed pit containing more than 1,200 pieces of ancient cedar wood. When painstakingly assembled over several decades, these fragments formed a 144-foot solar boat built with engineering sophistication that predates comparable shipbuilding techniques by millennia. The vessel was constructed without metal fasteners, held together instead by an intricate tension rope system and precision joinery that demonstrated advanced understanding of structural mechanics and materials science. Engineer Morrison, whose defense contracting experience had included analysis of advanced naval architecture for classified military applications, examined detailed plans of the Khufu solar boat with growing amazement at the sophisticated engineering principles it demonstrated. His analysis revealed construction techniques that challenged conventional understanding of ancient Egyptian technological capabilities. "This isn't primitive boat construction," Morrison reported in engineering conferences that attracted specialists from aerospace and naval architecture industries. The interlocking plank system creates structural flexibility that allows the massive vessel to flex with water movement without compromising hull integrity. The rope binding technique distributes stress loads across the entire structure using principles that weren't officially developed until Scandinavian shipwrights perfected similar methods 4,000 years later. We're looking at advanced marine engineering that demonstrates understanding of hydrodynamics, structural dynamics, and materials science that rivals contemporary yacht design. The precision of the joinery exceeded anything achieved by Bronze Age civilizations elsewhere in the world. Each plank interlocked with adjacent pieces using tolerances measured in fractions of millimeters, requiring cutting tools and measurement instruments that shouldn't exist in the archaeological record. The flexibility of the rope-bound joints allowed the massive structure to respond to stress without cracking, using mechanical principles that modern engineers associate with advanced composite construction techniques. Perhaps most puzzling, 2 additional sealed boat pits remain unopened beside the Great Pyramid, containing vessels that ground-penetrating radar suggests are even larger and more complex than the reconstructed example. Egyptian authorities have resisted opening these pits, citing preservation concerns, but their reluctance may reflect awareness that the contents would challenge historical timelines even more dramatically than the artifacts already revealed. The pattern of sophisticated mechanical engineering extends beyond naval architecture into devices hidden within religious artifacts. Buried in the Metropolitan Museum's collection is a small wooden statue of Hathor that seemed unremarkable until X-ray examination revealed internal mechanisms that transformed the piece from simple devotional object into precision automaton. A mechanical axis runs from the shoulder through the torso, connecting to articulated joints that allow the arm to rise and fall in controlled movements. Dr. Ashford, whose engineering background had complemented his archaeological training before his departure from mainstream academia, recognized the statue's true nature immediately upon examining the X-ray imagery. His analysis revealed mechanical sophistication that challenged assumptions about ancient Egyptian technological capabilities and artistic intentions. "This isn't accidental construction or repair damage," Ashford explained during independent research presentations that attracted engineers and archaeologists working outside traditional institutional frameworks. Someone designed that motion with specific intention, engineering internal mechanical systems using principles of leverage, pivot points, and controlled articulation that demonstrate advanced understanding of kinematic engineering. We're looking at deliberate automation technology in Bronze Age religious artifacts. The mechanical systems within Egyptian tombs themselves reveal even more sophisticated engineering applications. Royal burial chambers contain evidence of automated sealing mechanisms, gravity-triggered portcullis systems, counterweight devices, and precision-cut grooves designed to lock chambers permanently once burial procedures were completed. The Great Pyramid's granite portcullis system consists of 3 60-ton blocks engineered to drop into position with mathematical precision that required exact calculations of weight distribution, friction coefficients, and descent rates. These aren't symbolic architectural features designed to impress visitors or demonstrate royal authority. They're functional mechanisms built to operate reliably under specific conditions, using engineering principles that wouldn't be seen again in world architecture until medieval castle construction techniques developed similar approaches to defensive engineering. The tomb of Seti Thamoi contains angled ramps, concealed doors, and multi-stage ceiling systems that required sophisticated understanding of structural mechanics and automated operation sequences. The precision of the stone cutting and mechanical component integration exceeds anything achieved by contemporary Bronze Age civilizations, suggesting access to tools and measurement techniques that don't appear in the official archaeological record. Beyond burial architecture, Egyptian ritual devices demonstrate instrumental precision that contradicts their supposed religious function. Sistra vibrate at specific acoustic frequencies when manipulated correctly. Water clocks measure temporal intervals using controlled flow rates and calibrated measurement systems. Nilometers use hydraulic principles to predict flood cycles with accuracy that requires sophisticated understanding of fluid dynamics and statistical analysis. These instruments demand mathematical knowledge, materials science expertise, and precision manufacturing, capabilities that emerge most clearly during periods of political upheaval and environmental crisis, the same historical windows when medical knowledge was being suppressed and burial protocols were being disrupted by emergency circumstances. When you step back and examine the full scope of evidence, from vanished physicians and systematically erased medical texts to impossible engineering precision and rushed royal burials, from experimental mummification techniques to mass preservation sites, from hidden mechanical devices to chemical compounds that shouldn't exist, a single truth emerges with unsettling clarity. Ancient Egypt was not simply a civilization that built monuments and worshipped gods. It was a civilization that curated knowledge with surgical precision, managing information like a strategic resource that could determine the survival of entire dynasties. For the American experts who have risked their professional reputations to investigate these mysteries, the personal stakes extend far beyond academic curiosity or career advancement. Each specialist has encountered evidence that challenges the foundational assumptions of their respective fields, forcing them to choose between institutional conformity and intellectual honesty in ways that carry profound professional and personal costs. Colonel Gibson's decision to publicly analyze the architectural evidence from Saqqara cost him consulting contracts with archaeological firms that depend on maintaining relationships with Egyptian authorities and academic institutions. His engineering assessment of tool marks and construction precision contradicts official timelines in ways that make his expertise inconvenient for organizations seeking to preserve established narratives about ancient technological capabilities. 30 years in military construction taught me to recognize precision work and systematic planning, Gibson explained during a private interview conducted in his suburban Virginia home. surrounded by architectural blueprints and geological surveys that represent a retirement project that has consumed his pension savings and professional reputation. When I see engineering evidence that challenges official explanations, I have two choices: maintain comfortable silence or report what the evidence actually shows. My oath as an officer didn't include protecting comfortable lies. Dr. Hawthorne's willingness to apply NASA materials analysis techniques to ancient Egyptian artifacts led to reassignment within the agency and eventual early retirement, when his conclusions about impossible Bronze Age precision became politically inconvenient for an organization dependent on congressional funding and international cooperation. His technical expertise in spacecraft construction provided analytical frameworks that revealed manufacturing capabilities that threaten established archaeological timelines. I spent my career analyzing tolerances and material properties that determine whether spacecraft survive re-entry or disintegrate in Earth's atmosphere, Hawthorne reflected during a secure video conference from his home laboratory, where he continues independent research using equipment purchased with his early retirement settlement. When I see similar precision in artifacts that supposedly predate advanced metallurgy by thousands of years, intellectual honesty requires acknowledging what the evidence demonstrates, regardless of how inconvenient that truth might be for accepted historical frameworks. Engineer Morrison's classification-level security clearance was revoked after his analysis of Serapeum construction techniques appeared in defense industry publications, effectively ending his career in advanced materials research for military applications. His expertise in precision manufacturing and mechanical systems provided insights into ancient Egyptian engineering capabilities that challenged assumptions about technological development in ways that intelligence agencies considered potentially destabilizing to American technological superiority narratives. Dr. Hayes's geological analysis of underground chamber networks beneath Egyptian archaeological sites led to funding cancellation for his Texas oil exploration projects when corporate sponsors became concerned about the political implications of his findings. His seismic mapping techniques revealed structural evidence that contradicts official explanations about ancient Egyptian construction capabilities in ways that could affect international energy partnerships and Middle Eastern diplomatic relationships. 25 years mapping subsurface petroleum deposits taught me to read geological evidence without political interpretation. Hayes explained during a private consultation at his Dallas office, now focused exclusively on independent archaeological research funded through personal savings and private donations. When seismic data reveals engineering capabilities that challenge established timelines, my professional obligation is to report accurate findings, not convenient conclusions that preserve comfortable assumptions about ancient civilizations. Dr. Ashford's departure from the Smithsonian followed his refusal to modify research conclusions about ancient preservation techniques and mechanical engineering evidence that institutional leadership considered incompatible with museum exhibition narratives and international scholarly relationships. His expertise in ancient technologies provided analytical frameworks that revealed capabilities the institution preferred to minimize or ignore entirely. The pattern of professional isolation experienced by these specialists reflects broader institutional resistance to evidence that challenges established frameworks for understanding ancient Egyptian civilization. Universities, museums, government agencies, and corporate sponsors have invested decades of resources and reputation in maintaining specific narratives about technological development and historical progression that make contradictory evidence professionally dangerous for researchers who depend on institutional support. Yet these experts continue their investigation because the evidence compels recognition regardless of professional consequences. The precision of granite boxes that exceed modern manufacturing tolerances, the systematic erasure of medical knowledge across centuries and geographical regions, the chemical compounds that require pharmaceutical capabilities officially unknown until contemporary times, the mechanical devices hidden within religious artifacts, the surgical procedures revealed in mummy CT scans that demonstrate anatomical knowledge comparable to modern medical education. Each piece of evidence reinforces the central conclusion that Egypt possessed technological and scientific capabilities far beyond officially recognized Bronze Age limitations, and that this knowledge was systematically controlled, restricted, and ultimately suppressed by institutional authorities who considered it too dangerous for general preservation or transmission to future generations. The implications of what these American experts have discovered extend far beyond academic debates about ancient Egyptian capabilities or historical timelines. They point toward a fundamental question about knowledge itself. What happens when a civilization possesses information so powerful that it threatens the stability of the social order that created it? And what responsibility do we bear, as inheritors of that buried legacy, to uncover truths that previous generations deliberately concealed? The evidence suggests that ancient Egypt faced exactly this dilemma repeatedly throughout its history. During periods of political upheaval, environmental crisis, and religious revolution, advanced knowledge that was normally restricted to elite specialists emerged into broader application. Medical procedures that could heal or harm with equal efficiency. Chemical compounds that could preserve life or deliver death with precision dosing. Engineering techniques that could create monuments or weapons depending on their application. Mechanical devices that could serve ritual purposes or military functions with minor modifications. Each time this knowledge surfaced during crisis periods, Egyptian authorities made the same calculated decision: systematic suppression and deliberate erasure rather than risk the information falling into hands that might use it to destabilize the established order. They chose controlled ignorance over dangerous wisdom, institutional stability over technological advancement, political security over scientific progress. But the knowledge wasn't destroyed. It was buried, layer by layer, beneath sand and stone and silence, waiting for future generations to rediscover what their predecessors had deemed too perilous to preserve. The empty tomb of Teti Nebfu. The impossible precision of Serapeum, granite boxes. The recycled royal artifacts that tell stories of political chaos and emergency measures. The mass cemetery with its 1,000,000 preserved bodies and missing documentation. The surgical procedures revealed in mummy CT scans. The mechanical devices hidden within religious artifacts. Each discovery represents a fragment of a larger puzzle that Egypt intended to keep buried forever. Today, we stand at a crossroads similar to the one that faced ancient Egyptian authorities when they made their fateful decisions about knowledge management and information control. Modern technology, ground-penetrating radar, satellite imagery, CT scanning, chemical analysis, materials engineering assessment, has given us tools to peer beneath the deliberate concealment that protected Egyptian secrets for millennia. We can see what they hid. We can understand what they suppressed. We can recover what they buried. The question is whether we have the courage to follow the evidence wherever it leads, regardless of how profoundly it might challenge our comfortable assumptions about human history, technological development, and the progression of civilization. For Colonel Gibson, Dr. Hawthorne, Engineer Morrison, Dr. Hayes, Dr. Ashford, Dr. Patricia, Dr. Whitmore, Dr. Clare, and Stanley, the American specialists who risked their careers to investigate these mysteries, the answer has been clear despite the professional costs. Truth matters more than institutional comfort. Evidence trumps convenient narratives. The integrity of scientific investigation supersedes political convenience or academic orthodoxy. But their individual courage means nothing without broader recognition of what their discoveries represent. We are approaching a moment when the deliberate concealment that protected Egyptian secrets for 4,000 years may finally be overcome by technological capabilities that exceed anything ancient authorities could have imagined when they made their decisions about knowledge suppression. Satellite analysis reveals geometric patterns hidden beneath centuries of sand accumulation. Seismic mapping detects vast underground complexes that dwarf anything currently excavated. Chemical analysis identifies preservation compounds that require pharmaceutical capabilities officially unknown until contemporary times. Materials engineering assessment reveals manufacturing precision that challenges our understanding of ancient technological limitations. The desert of Egypt isn't empty space waiting for modern development. It's an archive, carefully curated and deliberately sealed, containing information that could revolutionize our understanding of human capabilities, technological development, and the relationship between knowledge and power that has shaped civilization for millennia. As Americans, we face a choice that echoes the decisions made by our founders when they chose revolutionary truth over comfortable subjugation. We can accept established narratives that protect institutional interests and international relationships, or we can demand investigation of evidence that challenges those narratives regardless of political convenience. We can preserve the silence that Egypt created to protect its secrets, or we can apply American principles of open investigation and intellectual courage to uncover what lies beneath the sand. The technology exists. The evidence is accumulating. The pattern of systematic knowledge suppression has been documented across centuries and geographical regions. What remains is the will to pursue truth wherever it leads, even when that pursuit threatens comfortable assumptions about human history and technological development that have shaped our understanding of civilization itself. Our children and grandchildren will inherit whatever choice we make. They will live with the consequences of our courage or our comfort-seeking. They will benefit from the knowledge we uncover or suffer from the ignorance we preserve. The sands are shifting. The secrets are surfacing. The question is no longer what Egypt was hiding beneath the sand. The question is what we're prepared to do with what we find. The choice, as it has always been throughout American history, is ours to make, and the clock is ticking.